Greetings and salutations. Even more bizarre and troubling news out of Venezuela this week, Hawk Watchers, as the United States and their favorite self-proclaimed Venezuelan President Juan Guaido continue their efforts to take down the country's current sitting elected president, Nicolas Maduro. Yes, things are beginning to smell a lot like, covert regime change Alan Dulles style, as Venezuelan officials are now accusing the United States of delivering a cache of weapons and communication devices into the oil-rich country to help foment a right-wing uprising against the very socialist government. The Daily Mail reports that, quote, an investigation led by the Venezuelan National Guard on Monday seized high-powered weaponry at an airport in the northern city of Valencia, and that government officials claim a cargo plane that arrived Sunday from Miami delivered 19 rifles, 118 magazines, and 90 wireless radios. Also included in the mix were 6 iPhones as well. Now, while the Daily Mail did rightfully observe that Venezuelan officials haven't yet offered any actual evidence to support their conclusions as to who was sending the weapons and for what ultimate purpose, it doesn't really take a rocket scientist or history buff to guess why someone in Miami would be shipping weapons into Venezuela at this moment in time. And in case you were wondering just what is President Donald Trump and United States game plan for Venezuela, WikiLeaks has provided a pretty good outline in a 2008 Army Special Operations Forces Unconventional Warfare Field Manual. Army always writes long titles. Yes, they actually have field manuals for unconventional warfare and coups. Originally published by WikiLeaks back in December 2008, the 248-page long regime change handbook, as some call it, actually highlights how through unconventional warfare you can manipulate a country's economics to your gain. I think Warren Zevon would agree. It's time to send lawyers, guns, and money and start watching the Hawks.
If you want to know what's going on in your city and your streets, never back down like Tyrell, and the truth is what you seek. To analyze, investigate from the bottom to the top. You speak your mind like Sean Stone, whether they like it or not. I got Tabitha, Miss Wallace, with the wisdom and the pearl, between the outrage and the evidence of what's going on in this world. The Hawks, watching the Hawks, watching the Hawks. Listen when they talk.
Welcome everyone to Watching the Hawks. I am Tyrell Ventura.
And I'm Tabitha Wallace. Oh, sending guns to Venezuela. Who would have ever thought of it? It's such a crazy, wacky idea, especially from Miami.
Yeah, no, that was what it got me. It was like, really? Cargo plane from Miami was a few little guns in the bottom and some iPhones. Whatever could that be for?
Yeah. And then I think there was also these shortwave radios, like short-term. Yeah, so walkie-talkies, guns, and iPhones. I don't think it was for a party. I mean, it wasn't for something non-nefarious, I can tell you, no matter what it is.
I always have guns, walkie-talkies, and iPhones at all my parties.
Preparing for the zombie apocalypse, obviously.
It's interesting, and kind of in time with all of these things that we're seeing take place, happen in real time with Venezuela, WikiLeaks kind of reminded us, like, hey, don't forget this field manual that we released a while back with a recent tweet. The field manual essentially boasts that Army Special Operations Forces can use the government to apply unilateral and indirect financial power through persuasive influence to international and domestic financial institutions regarding availability and terms of loans, grants, and other financial assistance to foreign state and non-state actors. This is in order to provide measured and focused financial incentives or disincentives to persuade adversaries, allies, and surrogates to modify their behavior. Which, Tab, is kind of what? The fancy way of saying, like, hey, we can...
We'll discipline you like children?
Exactly. Exactly.
I didn't realize it was a daycare and that the United States was responsible for making everybody make sure that
I like that, it's like enemies, allies, and surrogates. That was
why is the Army using financial power? Like, why is the Army involved in manipulating financial matters?
That's the big question at hand, and one of the reasons they do it is because then they can put pressure on countries that they don't like, ruin their economy, and then hopefully foment regime change.
Right. That works really well. One thing interesting about the manual, obviously, is this a country's involvement with international financial institutions, which aren't entirely, the World Bank, although the United States decides who runs it, so I don't know if it's really a World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and you've seen a lot of that being used for very political purposes. This was supposed to be made to give loans to developing countries so that more richer countries could help other countries develop. That's good for all of us, but apparently we're not using that. And then a lot of it's just incentives to sustain our coalitions that are waging this sort of support. In these unconventional warfare. To me, this is unconventional warfare. I think it's disgusting.
I agree.
This is the kind of thing that should be a war crime, because what you're doing is purposely hurting civilians in order to get politicians or people in political power to do what you want them to do. That isn't listening to the people. That isn't, now all of a sudden you decided that you have to send food to Venezuela. Why weren't you doing that a year ago when you were already complaining about how terrible it was in Venezuela? Then why weren't you sending food?
That's a great point.
You might have earned a lot more backing from people in Venezuela if they had actually acted like they cared about the fact that people didn't have food.
That's a really good
But they can't, because then they'd have to admit that the reason they didn't have food, the reason they didn't have supplies, is because we unilaterally decided to put all of these sanctions and tell everybody, if you do business here, we will sanction you.
Yeah, because you can't have you can't have Venezuela do well. That goes against the narrative you're trying to sell to the world about that government and Maduro and all of that.
Yeah. Since November of 2018, the Yellow Vest protests have not only captivated the headlines and politics of France, but also Europe and the rest of the world as well. And now the Gilets jaunes have apparently helped add to the already escalating tensions between the governments of France and Italy after the protesters met with Italian Deputy Prime Minister Luigi Di Maio in Paris last Tuesday over the protests of French leaders. Next, in an unprecedented move since the end of World War II, France has now recalled its ambassador to Italy in response to the meeting. RT America's Rachel Blevins has the story and the timeline of events that have brought France, Italy, and the Yellow Vest to where we are today.
The Yellow Vest movement started out as a group of French citizens who were voicing their grievances about their government on social media. And now it has grown to the point where members of that group are meeting with government officials in Italy. It started in October 2018 with a single video that was viewed more than 6.3 million times. In it, a disgruntled citizen criticized President Macron for the ways